You're listening to Women Leading Prevention Science, where we host candid conversations with some of the most accomplished women in the prevention science field. I'm Sarah Haregrove, a public health analyst at RTI International and a master's in public health student at the University of Maryland. As I move through my early years as a prevention scientist, it's an honor to speak with these inspiring female leaders in the field. This podcast was developed as part of the NIH Helping End Addiction Long-Term Initiative or the HEAL Prevention Cooperative. The views expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and not the official views of NIH, the NIH HEAL Initiative, NIDA, or the participating institutions and organizations. Today, I'll be talking with Dr. Sarah Steverman about her career journey that led her to contributing to prevention science from a position in the federal government with the National Institute on Drug Abuse, or NIDA. NIDA's mission is to advance science on the causes and consequences of drug use and use disorders, and to apply that knowledge to improve individual and public health. Thank you so much for joining me today, Sarah. Would you mind introducing yourself and your current work?
I work at NIDA, at the National Institute on Drug Abuse, in the Prevention Research Branch. I'm also a project officer. I cover portfolios in healthcare and in policy. So research related to preventing substance use in healthcare settings and in using policy or systems level interventions. And then I also serve as a project scientist on 3 HEAL prevention studies. And I also am a project scientist on a couple other initiatives as well.
What's a day in the life of a NIDA project scientist?
We spend a lot of time in meetings, writing, reading, learning about what our grantees are up to, what they're interested in pursuing next, and spend quite a bit of time talking to applicants or potential applicants who are interested in sending us an application related to prevention. And that's actually one of my favorite parts of this job, is speaking with investigators, learning about their research, learning about their ideas, and trying to align NIDA priorities and HEAL priorities with kind of what they're interested in doing and what their skill sets are. Another part of the NIDA program role is supporting grantees who are eligible for funding and those who have grants with NIDA. So when applications come into the Institute, we track their review once they come in, and then we shepherd them through funding decisions. And then once funded, a main function of this role is monitoring their study progress and offering support along the way for their studies. And as project scientist on HEAL, I'm able to take an even more active role as a collaborator on projects. I'm able to meet regularly with the HEAL study teams, weigh in on study decisions, and even on occasion present and publish with the research teams to try to get out the HEAL science that we're supporting. And then lastly, a large part of the program role, and where I spend quite a bit of time, is keeping up generally with the prevention field, with our science and what's going on in other parts of the federal government related to prevention, and also what's going on with prevention at state and local levels as well. So we're trying to do our part to find opportunities to move our NIDA science into practice, and this and support implementation at different levels of the government. So this often involves working with federal partners and external stakeholders to identify those opportunities to improve the system, opportunities to support evidence-based decision-making, evidence-based policymaking, and to take advantage of opportunities for interventions that we know work to ensure that they are being implemented in the field.
Sarah shared that in some ways she's had a bit of a meandering career, and one that was less traditional. Her different experiences really helped her focus in on the type of work she wanted to do, even if it took her a little longer to get to where she is today.
It is quite different from a lot of the researchers that we work with who are in academia. I did take a circuitous route to federal government, and even a little bit of a circuitous route to my PhD. So when I was a religion major in college, and I majored in religion because I thought it was interesting, and I had no plan whatsoever what I was going to do with it. And so I got out of undergrad and I worked for a few years in community mental health in DC. I worked with adults with serious mental illness and co-occurring substance use disorder, most of whom had pretty significant social determinants of health that were impacting their mental health and their overall health. And then I decided I should get my master's in social work because that seemed like a good next step to be better equipped to work with populations and address issues related to systemic issues and individual issues related to mental health and substance use. So I got my MSW, and in that process realized I do not want to be a therapist. I didn't want to become a licensed social worker, and I went the policy route. So I worked with state legislators, working on mental health state level policy, and then moved into advocacy. So I was really working with states and state level advocates to try to improve mental health and substance use systems, and learning a lot about financing. And the overall kind of theme that I was seeing and understanding was that we were sort of putting Band-Aids on these problems. And so I really was sort of thinking about like, how do we get ahead of this, which obviously brings us to prevention. And so I went back and got my PhD while I worked. So I didn't go kind of a more traditional route. I was working. I had a mortgage that I needed to pay. And so I had a job and I worked. I went to school at night or in the afternoon, evening, and I worked all weekend to get my PhD done. I finished my PhD and was making lots of decisions based on personal preferences of being in DC, finances, as I mentioned, like needing to pay my mortgage, having a mortgage and wanting to live in the home that I owned in DC. And so I chose my PhD program largely based on that and having a life here in DC, as opposed to kind of the research that I might be able to do in a PhD program. I learned the basics of research, but certainly did not have a lot of the opportunities that many more traditional PhD students would have, where they are part of a lab, and then moving into potentially a postdoc position where you are just, nose down doing research with a mentor. So then after graduating with my PhD, I was sort of in the process of moving with my spouse and having a baby. And I eventually ended up at SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, where I worked on contracts related to financing and prevention. I was able to get into the federal government and really see how a lot of the decisions around state level grant making, community level grant making, as well as policy level decision making happens kind of in the ground. And then I needed to move again for my partner's job, for my spouse's job. And I moved to a position where I could be mobile, which was with a contractor doing research and a lot of qualitative research and a lot of policy analysis, as well as some evidence review work, looking at evidence-based practices. And I was the project director for the Evidence-Based Practice Resource Center, housed at SAMHSA, where we were really looking across myriad mental health and substance use issues related to evidence-based practices and trying to really translate the research to the field. I have a passion that has been developed over all of these positions to try to figure out how do we get this research that NIH is funding, largely funding, and getting that out to the field. And that was an opportunity to do that. And I came from there to NIDA with an interest in really kind of better understanding and better supporting the research. So I have kind of like from practice to advocacy for funding for the research to the policy and the state level grant making and the federal level grant making to kind of translation of that research and then all the way back to the research.
I really appreciate hearing your story as an early career professional who's also working full-time through grad school and figuring out what's next.
I think that my path and being a generalist in the way that I am and having had these different experiences and working in these different sectors from direct service to advocacy to nonpartisan, working with state legislators and really need to be nonpartisan and really relying on the evidence to speak to legislators about what policies might work best, to navigating the system within the federal government, being a contractor where you have sort of those dynamics of and understanding as a contractor a lot of what applicants have to deal with as far as being responsive to the federal government and not quite knowing what the federal government wants. Like, I think all of those experiences has led me to a place where I am not the person to come to if you have a question about your effect size or statistical design. Like, I just haven't, I can't answer that question. What I think is really fun about this position is that it does draw on a lot of the experience that I have and a lot of the knowledge that I have and the kind of perspective, I guess, that I have from kind of understanding these various levels of decision making and these various stakeholders and experts kind of throughout our field.
It sounds like you really gained that from, again, working from every different angle. You're able to now build that kind of wider view of what's going on and with the financing and the policies and everything. You can look at the actual state of things and see how that impacts your grantees.
The order that I did things in was not necessarily linear or logical. And a lot of the decisions I made were really based on external, decisions as far as where I wanted to work and life circumstances and finances and things like that. And that's fine. There's no right way to do this.
Sarah wants every community to have the resources to ensure that parents and children are healthy and have the best outcomes possible. This desire, coupled with her experiences as a partner and a mother, motivate her to do prevention science.
I think it goes back to this sort of bigger picture, more generalist feeling is just that we can really get ahead of these problems and thinking about kids now who can have healthy lives in the future. I think some of the first prevention research that I read was the Nurse Family Partnership, David Olds' decades long studies on Nurse Family Partnership, and it just makes so much sense to set up kids and young parents with the resources to build a healthy life for their kids. And I think now that I am a parent and that I'm a parent that has parented through a pandemic, like I understand even better those early Nurse Family Partnership studies, because I know what it's like to be in a healthy and safe home with a small child and how hard it is. And so thinking about being in a home that is in a neighborhood that's not necessarily safe and that has food insecurity and financial insecurity is just, I understand how those parents and those kids can have more difficult and worse outcomes than my kids. I'm a white parent of white kids, and I have resources and I have a partner, and I don't experience violence on a regular basis, and it's hard. And so when you are experiencing this from a position of a lot of inequity and where you don't have the resources that I have, like, I can understand how we need to prepare our communities, we need to prepare our kids, we need to prepare in these very basic ways of giving as I see it, kind of basic rights of health and homes and financial security. That's like sort of the basis of this, of creating healthy communities and healthy homes, and healthy kids and healthy parents and healthy people, healthy adults.
Sarah offered important advice for young women aspiring to work in the prevention field or in prevention for the federal government. She suggests that young women talk to people about their careers, and she wants them to know that you don't have to have a PhD to do meaningful prevention science that you're passionate about.
I have always been someone who loves to talk about careers and options. And I think most people are that way. I had a MSW internship at SAMHSA. My supervisor is now retired from SAMHSA, but David Morissette, um, he was a really great mentor. And he told me, people love to talk about themselves and people love to talk about their work, especially when they're doing work that, you know, is mission driven and is, um, in the weeds and is, on a topic that you also care about. So I thought that was really great advice that, you know, having the opportunity to meet with people, and most people are not so busy that they can't take a half an hour or an hour to speak with someone. And so I think if you are, sort of unsure about where you want to go or what you want to do, reaching out and trying to talk to someone is one way to do that. I'm sure that maybe not every field is this way, but I think prevention science and in general, mental health, substance use, health equity related folks are, are just, it's good people, I think, who want to help and want to be collaborative and want to be supportive of more junior folks. I think reaching out on LinkedIn or like looking on websites of organizations that you're interested in and being bold and reaching out to people. And it really is not, I don't know anybody who is going to not answer your email if they are able to open it and read it and speak to you, or to pass you to somebody who is more appropriate as well. I'm always happy to have someone referred to me that I should speak to. I'll also say that you don't have to have a PhD in order to work and have meaningful work in government by any means. And so, or in basically any of the settings that I have worked in, there's a lot of folks with bachelor's and master's degrees that are doing really meaningful work and have really great experience. And there's also something really, as someone who's getting to be a little bit more getting on in my career a little bit, I love working with people who are younger and have a different backgrounds and different experiences. And there's almost nothing I like more than supporting people who are excited about the field and excited about their work. And so I really, and that there are different ways to go about making decisions. And I was working with a former colleague who was deciding where to go for their master's in public health and talking through, all of these different options that they had and really trying to ask them what they felt like the right vibe was. I mean, it was, this person was at a point in their life where they were, really trying to establish community where they are in Boston, and decided to stay in Boston and not go to more, kind of prestigious, potentially, not that there aren't very great public health schools in Boston, I'm not saying that, but, that they had so many options. And I think that there's just not always taking the most, I think it's important to not always take the most competitive or seemingly most prestigious decision. And so that may mean for someone not getting their PhD, and that may mean for someone not taking the postdoc. And I think those are all really valid ways to go.
I think that's a really important consideration. Just that layer where we're also people, we're not just employees, or we're not just students. And sometimes you do have to prioritize those other aspects of your life.
And a recognition that there are really great opportunities and great people and great experiences at all different levels and all different spots, that goes, I think, for our feeling about applicants too, who, I love when an applicant is coming from a from an institution that hasn't had a lot of NIH funding. I mean, that is just really, we need diversity. We need people who have different life experiences. We need people who, understand communities that we want to impact. And so, that's not always going to be sort of this more traditional, people coming from this more traditional process through academia and into government, even necessarily. That those roots can really bring a lot of really good people and good experiences to our work when we have diversity within our ranks.
Thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. And thank you to our listeners for joining us for Women Leading Prevention Science. We hope you enjoyed this episode and that you'll continue to join us as we host candid conversations with some of the most accomplished women in the prevention science field. We hope you'll share this podcast with your prevention science colleagues and with any young women you know that may be interested in pursuing a career in science. The HEAL Prevention Cooperative is funded through the NIH HEAL Initiative, an aggressive effort to speed scientific solutions to curb the national opioid public health crisis. The HEAL Prevention Cooperative includes 10 research projects throughout the country and one coordinating center based at RTI International in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina. For more information on the NIH HEAL Initiative, please visit heal.nih.gov.